Hello and good afternoon to you all. This is the UK Deaf Leadership Summit webinar series. So welcome. It's a live webinar and we've got a special guest who's joining us today, William Marger. If you'd like to join us, William.
Hi there. Can you see me okay?
Excellent. Very clear. Perfect. Lovely to have you with us today, William. I'm sure the audience is very keen to know your sign name. What is your sign name?
Okay, my sign name is that of a piano, but my surname is Lager, so my pronunciation is Marger, which sounds like a pint.
Thank you, William. You're also deaf. You're a writer, director, and producer. We're all familiar with William, BBC production, also scriptwriter for the BBC, called The Reunion, or Reunion. I think it's got various signs. Perhaps we'll talk about that a little later. So this is an opportunity to discuss his leadership journey and to learn more about Billy's journey. And you're looking forward to having the conversation. Hopefully.
I am enthusiastic, I think.
So we just have an hour, and I'd like to start with the first question. Of course, the first question is a really important one. It's about the start of your leadership journey. I mean, you've said previously that you were told by a doctor that you wouldn't be able to become a high achiever. Wow, somebody actually said that to yourself at a young age. So what has that done to affect your journey, your career, life, passion, and your leadership?
A nice and easy question to start with. It was really my mother, when I was diagnosed as being deaf when I was at the age of 1. And my mother was told that I would never be a high achiever, that I would never learn to read and write. I mean, they gave her the most awful information. And then, just being deaf, that's all it is. That's all it was. But what it meant is that my mother decided to teach me on a one-to-one basis how to speak, how to lip read, and write. My mother gave up work to constantly teach me, which means that I never was exposed to sign language. I was oral in approach. I went to a mainstream school. I spoke, I lip read right throughout my entire, but I did have an internal weird identity. I wasn't deaf, but I wasn't hearing either. I was in a very confused state. And then when I moved to London and I started to work with the BBC, that's when I first started to meet with other deaf people. I started to pick up signs. Then I met my wife, and then it was my wife that truly taught me how to sign properly. And here I am. I still struggle somewhat with my identity in terms of language. My brain is fundamentally English. And sometimes I do struggle to find the right sign and how to process information from English to sign language. And also, a lot of deaf people will do a lot of code switching. When you go into a lot of profoundly deaf spaces and going into a room of professionals, as well as interpreters, I do tend to use my sign language as sign supported English. My leadership journey really started from the point of proving people wrong that I can do it. So thanks to the doctor for saying that I was not going to be a high achiever.
I've just picked up the point, say that about your identity. How old were you when you thought you had that identity? How old?
22, 23. Up until that point, I never really met a deaf person, weirdly.
That's really interesting. I think the same could be said of many other deaf people who, they're formally mainstreamed. I also am an ex-mainstream person, such as yourself. And obviously, with identity, you find out where you are later, whether it's teenager or in your early 20s. And that's quite common, I would suggest. What do you think?
Definitely. It seems like deaf people are split into different groups. One that have deaf parents, deaf culture, that they would have been exposed to that as they were growing up, and those that are born hearing. So normally you would be in that major category. I think it's something like 90% of deaf children are born into hearing families, which means that they are isolated and start to look for other people like them in order to find your own tribe.
Another question for you about that. When you found your identity, and obviously having the opportunity to look more and more into that, do you have any regrets or no regrets?
No, no, no. Looking back, everything that happens for a reason. It became part of my identity. There was bad experiences, good experiences, but they all built my character. And looking back, you have that realization that things are better. There are no regrets. There are no feelings of anger about what has happened in my past.
And that's really important to have that. I picked up your point about you moved to London, didn't you, to look for a job and then joined the BBC. You eventually became the series producer for See Here. And you're one of very few deaf people to take that leadership role, particularly for the BBC. That is, inspiring. So how did you approach that, leading the team there at See Here and having deaf and hearing staff? What did you learn from that experience?
Looking back at that period of time, I look back at it with a sense of pride that I was able to achieve that type of role. And that time with the BBC has meant a lot for me. Having that logo of BBC meant a lot. And one thing was that I spent a lot of time learning from other series producers, shadowing them. Quite a few of them were hearing series producers that I could learn from, as well as working under Terry Riley. I got to see him in action. I got to see his leadership style, be it good or bad. And then when I became a series producer, we were still making around about 30 programs a year, which is a lot, which meant that schedule was really complicated, having to educate different people on different programs. The editing of the programs all would have taken time and quite challenging, but I really enjoyed, loved the challenge, loved the feeling of that I was actually a God in some kind of way, which is weird to say, because normally I was always underneath someone that would make the decisions to make things happen. So I was the director and I could make those decisions. And one of the interesting things when you are managing a mixed deaf and hearing team, I would always back the deaf more, because I felt it was my responsibility to ensure that deaf were encouraged. Dealing with hearing was somewhat different because they could easily go off to another program whenever they wanted to. They could easily leave hours and go into another space. For deaf people, there was less opportunities for them to be able to move on. So it felt as though now there were two different styles of management. One style was encouraging deaf people and supporting them. With hearing, it's just a case of explaining things to them, how to do the filming of sign language, some cultural elements as well. Two different styles here. The things that I did struggle with me and what were the biggest challenge was the ability to say no. Because internally, I know better now, but I am a people pleaser. I want to support everyone. I'm saying yes. I want to be able to say yes to you, But then it would get to the point where rules and regulations would come into place, HR, scheduling, which meant that I could not give deaf people what they wanted. And then ended up feeling that I was now the bad person. For example, when I took over working in Bristol, a lovely place, I'm still living here, love the place. But when we wanted to recruit deaf people in to see here, we had to say that you would have to move to Bristol. This was before COVID. This was before remote working. This was before the advent of Zoom, which meant that interviewing deaf people who really wanted to be in the team, I would have to say to them, you would have to then be in Bristol. When they did come to Bristol, it was the value of that for them and for us and their input. But I do think we could have had a lot more deaf input if they had been flexibility about the ways of working. Nowadays, it's a lot easier because of the remote facility.
It's very interesting what you've had to say, because I've picked up your point again about encouraging those deaf members of the team in the BBC. Obviously managing the hearing individuals as well, but in your role, can you talk about, you know, those deaf people who you've encouraged? Have they gone on to achieve success in their careers?
Oh, yeah. Now, I can't take the entire credit for them, but it was all about placement. If a deaf person was working with See Here, training within See Here, then we would engage them with other programs and the opportunity to have a 1 month experience of going one place and then coming back again. I have worked with so many good people. They are now commissioners, producers, directors, like they have gone on way better than I am. And then there are more deaf series producers. I mean, there's a lot of other young deaf people that have got those skills now, but I can't say it's all because of me.
You are very modest.
I am also aware of my limitations. I'm just trying to phrase it appropriately.
I would suggest that's one of your strongest attributes of leadership, I can imagine, from what you're saying. Can I move us on a little bit? And I wanted to ask about your first love being storytelling, I believe. I'd like you to tell us, if you don't mind. You've said yourself that filmmakers, sometimes they'll use a deaf character as a, like, you know, a quick fix to get an award. But with leadership, it's actually important to play, you know, have an authentic representation. What do you think?
Let me think. Looking at my own experience of working with Reunion as the only deaf person at an executive producer level, that meant that we were filming a drama series that included deaf characters. And, you know, having to be the bad guy, I had to put my hand up and say, I'm sorry, that's not on, that's not real, that's not authentic. And sometimes I felt really bad because everybody is working hard to understand, trying to reflect something that was believable. But what was important is that you had to draw the line of where you had to say, this must become believable. And there's also that case of having to push the boundaries, because at the end of the day, you wanted to make it real. And with Reunion, we knew that there was going to be a deaf audience and we wanted them to believe it. Because you don't want deaf people looking at the program going, what is that? Behaving like that, that's not real. That was the rule that we had. Anything that we had to go through had to be something that was truthful, and it had to be believable.
I think that probably leads us on to, obviously, it's not met without challenges. When you're convincing producers, the team, the crew, how did you manage to convince them to make it authentic? How did you achieve that?
They didn't need that much convincing. Everyone knew deep down what we were aiming for. Now, Warp Films, which is the name of the production company, they were a fantastic company. What was interesting is that from the start, they had said to me, we don't want you to become the deaf person. We want you to focus on the script. We will be the people that will go out and find our own information. Now, Warp Films had met with a lot of deaf people working on TV, asking them for their feedback, for their advice, and created the team from that. It wasn't just from me. Yeah, I would give them email addresses, names and numbers, making sure, have you contacted all of these people? But I did give them the names of deaf people, which I thought was very important to be part of the team. But what was interesting now, when I arrived at the studio on the first day of filming, to see so many deaf people in the crew that I had never met before. They were working costumes, makeup, camera, and they were just hanging around to do their job. And that side was just so amazing.
Wow. I mean, obviously, from our perspective, you're the first of your kind. Do you think that it will lead on further to more breakthroughs because you've been able to do this type of drama in that role?
Interesting, because when I was doing the press interviews around Reunion, there was one word or one phrase that kept coming up: groundbreaking. Reunion is groundbreaking, deaf drama. I actually felt quite emotional about that. Now, it wasn't just groundbreaking if it continues in the making of the Reunion. So if it's only the Reunion, it's not groundbreaking. Because if you look at the commissioning of the second series of the Code of Silence, that was great with the ITV. And I do believe that BBC could be doing more, but now it's a case of wait and see.
That actually, I think, helps to open more doors for further opportunities, if you like, in drama production, filmmaking, also your storytelling as well. So, do you think doors have opened much more since, not only since the Reunion, but others like Code of Silence?
Definitely. If you look at this year, 2025, it was massive. Reunion, Code of Silence, as well as returning home to Canada, where there was a huge deaf-led film festival. So if you look at those kind of opportunities and events, something is definitely shifting here in the UK. And one thing that's really important to remember is that here in the UK, we are the best of all in comparison to other countries when it comes to deaf media, deaf productions. When I went to Canada, there was a lot of deaf Canadians saying, how did you do that? How did you get so much support? And I think that is because we do it. Luke does amazing work. And there's also about the training and the encouragement that have happened over the generations with deaf filmmakers. And it's important to recognize all of that, as well as See Here, because See Here has been around since 1981. And so many people started their journey there, including me, that got to learn about media there. That is important. Other countries do not have access to work. They don't have deaf media. And then, you arrive in Canada and saying, here is our film, this is our TV series. And they were able to see sight of what we had done. And do remember that we are actually in a very privileged position at the moment. But we do have to maintain it. We do have to do more. We do have to build up on what has been achieved in this year of 2025. But what's happening next? Will there be more TV? Will there be more films? More, because you don't want to see it take a decline. Now, when the Reunion was commissioned was 3 years ago. the process of writing, development takes that long. So the commissioning happened 3 years ago. Now media is changing, that commissioning is more cautious and they're taking less risks. So I don't know, does that mean less diversity, less depth content? Don't know.
I guess it's about being at the right place at the right time.
Oh, honestly, I truly do believe that I was very lucky, because in the writing of the reunion, I just wrote it, sent it just to see if anybody was interested, and then it just took off. Now, if I can do it, it does mean that anybody else can do it, really.
Also, I think what you've explained about from the film industry, it can be quite fickle. You know, they'll suddenly perhaps go with something because of connections. And I guess connections are important, that you've been able to build up from your time within, from drama, media, industry in particular. So having those contacts has hopefully created a pathway for you to get into the success that you've had recently. Right. Can I talk about your experience with, you know, decisions and inclusion? I remember you did something with, was it Han Solo? Yes,
Yes.
Han Solo. So you decided to put subtitles in for everything, for all the dialogue. I mean, it was, whether it was signed or spoken, it was all in there. So did you want to make sure that nobody was excluded? I understand. How do you manage to balance the creative choices with inclusive practice? What can other leaders learn from that field?
Personally, I believe that access, oh no, there's two things. Access is invisible, and access should be for all. And when I was thinking about the subtitling provision, now I want to see everything. And I think it was because as I was growing up, I would watch the BBC subtitles, and I would have to say the BBC subtitling provision is the best in the world. They describe everything. For me, as a profoundly deaf person growing up watching films, the subtitle would show when there was music and could hear everything, and also what was said. For me, I wanted to carry that on the film screen, because I think that's important, because thinking about the next generation of deaf, how did they learn? How do films work? They have to see it. They have to understand it. They have to understand what they're seeing. And one of the things that happened to me when I was working on a picture show called The Watchdog, do you remember that? Watchdog? And there was a commissioning for a program, and I was working there. It was a tough program to do because the scheduling was tough. Filming on a Wednesday, editing on the weekend, and then it would be shown on a Monday. Then working with hearing editors late at night, 11, 12 o'clock at night, you're tired, and looked at me and said, "William, can I ask you a question?" I goes, "Yeah, what?" And he said to me, "Why is someone like you wanting to work in audio visual media?" And I sat there and I just went, okay, because they saw me as a deaf person, poor eyesight, working with audio and visuals. So obviously, well, why would somebody like you be in a place like here? And back at that time, I did not know what to say. And all I could think of was like, what an asshole. But it did make me think about, how do I answer that question 20 years later? And really, the answer is, I want to do this. I want to tell stories like you tell stories. I want to make films. I want to share life experiences of being me, myself. I now understand more now than I did back then.
I think it's about getting that experience throughout, isn't it? And we all are learning, aren't we, from all different kinds of experiences. But from what you've spoken about, it appears to me that, well, let me go back. I know you're from Yorkshire, you know, beautiful city of Sheffield.
Yeah.
But Sheffield's there was making steel, wasn't it? Or maybe they have steely determination built into them. So I can see that you're a very determined person. I would suggest in a quiet way. I don't think I'm wrong in having that sense of from you in terms of the situation, the challenges, your determination to quietly pursue and get through to achieve. Am I right or am I wrong in saying that about you, Billy? You're
Well,
there. Please tell us.
well, what a lovely description. And I'm actually going to now use that into my CV. I never thought of it like that. Thank you. And when I was thinking this morning, when you're deaf, the older you get, the more you realize that the world is simply not set up for you. You know, you wake up in the morning, you get out of bed, and the first interaction that you have is someone with a hearing person who knows nothing. You know, it could be the bus driver, the train driver, or whatever. Your first interaction, don't know. Then you go into shops, and by the end of the day, with all of those interactions, you're exhausted because you are having to fit in with a world that is not designed for you. It's never easy any day. When you're young, you're full of passion, you can cope. But then when you get to 30, 40, you're starting to feel the fatigue. So I don't know if I've got steely determination. I don't know, but there's a lot to be said for standing up, getting up, and showing up. Now, there have been periods in time when I got depressed where getting out of bed was not easy. And when you look at any deaf person, it's making that decision to get out of bed to go to work, knowing that they're going into a world that is not set up for them. I'm proud of them because they're simply doing it.
Thank you for your honesty. I think you're right. A lot of people have experienced those things that you talk about. I guess it brings me to perhaps feelings of resilience, if I can talk to you about that. I mean, you've talked about having adaptability. And, you know, you've explained that through the question asked. And obviously you've had your own career, you know, making short films initially, and then the experience of being a producer, as we've talked about for See Here at the BBC. Also, you've been doing your script writing for drama, The Reunion, amongst other things I know. But obviously, you know, getting up out of bed is one aspect. But what further challenges do you think that you're facing when you're having to adapt your own current leadership style going forward?
One thing that I will say is that I'm not really leading right now. I'm actually leading from the back. I am writing and I'm doing my own thing. I'm in my office at the moment. You can see my bedroom to the side, but I have a very short commute. The bed to my office, very short commute. But all of this is interesting because it's very different from management, going into an office every day, dealing with different teams. One thing, there's less stress because I only have to worry and manage myself and my own time. I actually never thought that I would actually miss social interaction. I am a loner per se, but I really do miss the day-to-day interactions. But, you know, meeting somebody for coffee, finding out about their day, about their life, and that is more difficult. So now I have to plan for it. I have to plan and go and meet people. Now, it's easy for me to stay here day after day, week after week, working. And when I'm really busy and when I have multiple deadlines to reach, that is when I literally pull away from humour and interaction. And I do notice that my mental health would go on the decline quite quickly. So it's that challenge of managing both your own company. It's not all about you, but also ensuring that you must meet with other people. Go out, look at the sky, smell the grass. Because I focus so much on writing now, writing for me is my absolute love. I get so much happiness when the writing goes really well, but I do have to remember that there are other things in life. And one problem that I think I've always had is that it's always been in relation to the identity in having a job. That is not always healthy, because when I was working at the BBC, I was William from the BBC with my card, whereas now I'm William the writer. Yeah, but what about my other identities, the other things? I'm also a father. I have a dog. I love video games. There are so many other elements to me. And when I look back at my life, I want it to be of a life well lived. I mean, there's so many questions that we all struggle with. Who am I really? Am I really my job only? I have my family also. There's so many others.
It's interesting. You're right. Particularly for deaf people ourselves, we want to achieve something in the mainstream world, and often it requires double or triple or quadruple the effort to prove ourselves, particularly in the mainstream world. I think the result of that is sometimes, yes, you get on and do it, but sometimes the results can be you trying to find yourself. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going in the right direction that I want to be? And starting thinking about balancing ourselves because of that double, triple, quadruple effort. And where am I in all that mix? And balancing your family and, you know, work and life balance, and the passion of where you want to go and what you've achieved. I mean, you've achieved so many things, you know, and people have said that about you. And modesty tells you, you know, people just think, you know, of you, of what you've achieved, but you also have to think of what you've accomplished as well. Having moved on, producing, and now being a writer. But of course, I want to ask you a question. I mean, obviously, you're encouraging others. I mean, for example, working at the BBC and the Reunion and perhaps other writers. Do you talk to other people and saying about, you can do it, take the opportunity, you can achieve, working behind the camera or wherever it may be, because it's encouraging others to prove themselves, not prove themselves, sorry, but they can achieve things for themselves in their own chosen field? I would say that you've been able to do that.
I'm starting to think about training to do that, to train others. For me, with Reunion, when I was writing it, and to know that there's so many deaf actors and so many deaf people that got work because of that script that I wrote. So it was a script that created opportunity for others. And as I mentioned before, when I looked at what has been created for those who are young, I can see a lot of positive inclines. It is growing. and what it is that's being done now, because now we do truly have deaf leaders. But that fight has gone on for a very long time, waiting for that deaf takeover to show that deaf people can do it. And now you do start to see that kind of change happen. And that makes me happy. Because at Lumo, when I look at Lumo now, and when they have asked me that, I'm going, I think I'm too old for you now, because they're looking at bringing up the young ones and giving them opportunities. I am more than happy to support Lumo and the work that they're doing, which is simply great. But my view is that whenever anybody asks me or contact me, I will open the door wide open to them. Email me, contact me. You know, if you want help with something, if you want to start something, if you want to know where to go. And again, Lumo is becoming the best place to go and find out the entry into and how to start to. And I wish Lumo had been around when I started 25 years ago. I started 25 years, and I'm just looking and going, where did the time go?
It disappears, doesn't it, in a blink of an eye. I think also, for the privilege of the audience, you've mentioned Lumo, sorry, that's sign, and the British Broadcasting Trust. No, is it British Sign Language Broadcasting?
British Sign Language Broadcasting Trust.
Yeah.
That was established, I think, around about 15, 16 years ago. And then it was rebranded into this new brand. But to be honest, it was time for them to find their footing, because in the past it was run by hearing. And now that they've gone, I can actually say that. It was a hearing savior thing. We know what's best for you. Whereas now that they have left, there is now a change in culture. There is a change of leadership in so many positive ways. And it's exciting to see what they're doing. The production of short films is exciting. And what's being made right now is exciting.
Wow. I mean, you're talking about your films, and it's becoming the norm for any festival, isn't it, to have deaf film festival, you know, whether it's here in the UK or in the rest of the world. I mean, you're in demand yourself, aren't you? I'm sure people are asking you to go to Italy, Australia, you've mentioned Canada, also events here in the UK and so on. So what you've said, you know, can you say what it's like perhaps compared to what it is now compared to 25 years ago and going forward? Do you see more deaf filmmakers, deaf writers like yourself, deaf producers, directors, and more short films coming if the commissioning goes well? Do you think that that's something?
So you're asking me to give me the history of deaf media for the past couple of decades. Okay, then. One thing I will say, and I remember going to one of the first deaf film festivals here in Wolverhampton way back in 2003, when it was run by the British Deaf Association. It's now become Deaf Fest. But that was an amazing place for me, because that is where I first met other deaf filmmakers. And there are so many different name signs that are being used here. And it's those particular people that became my tribe of people, whereby I could learn and be inspired by them. And that was, you know, the early, and now the quality of the films weren't great, including my own films as well. I mean, if you could look back, but it was all about learning. It was all about improving. And now the access to filmmakers is a lot easier than it was back then. You needed expensive equipment back then. You needed that specialist knowledge. But now I'm looking at young filmmakers using their own camera, their own laptop, their lighting, directing, editing, doing everything themselves, and doing it at a really high quality skilled level. So you can see the expansion, you can see deaf people themselves becoming more confident in telling their own stories. Okay. I don't want to sound egotistical, but one area where I think needs to be more radical is in the area of writing. It's easy to set up a camera, it's easy to do editing, but writing is still a challenge. Creative writing. Now, I didn't know that when I started, but it's that realization that there are special effects to be included when you're writing. You have to know how it's going to structure, you have to know how to structure the script, how to structure the character, all of that. But I am happy to train, support, and develop future potential. I'm not saying that writing's for everybody, can also kill me, but you know, giving deaf people tips and tricks and techniques on the script writing. I don't know everything about script writing. I'm still learning. I still have to think about how it all works. So that's another journey that I'm on, the art of writing.
That's really interesting. Well, yes, you've talked about, you know, the historical aspect. What's interesting for me, you know, my family and I all together watched your program, The Reunion, your series. And my family were looking at me to see if there's anything, oh, that's like typical hearing version. And there was nothing. And you're right, it was amazing. It was all very authentic. It was very true. And it was good to make a hearing audience aware of the reality of it. Also, coders, they'll admit and say, yeah, you really go through that. You know, and they'll say, oh, yes, typical, you know, one or two things are you know, the habit of being a deaf person. So creative writing that you're doing and be able to achieve that, because not only deaf people and recognize the authenticity, but like hearing people and coders will say, yeah, it makes sense. That's typical of deaf culture. Typical meaning, you know, it's a family joke. But it shows that your creative writing is actually authentic. You know, and a lot of people have been able to, you know, share that view.
I have to put my hand up and I say it wasn't all me, it was a team. Because there's other work that needs to be done, and each of them put their own stamp on their characters. The lead actor brought in so much of his own experiences, his own knowledge into his own character. The interpreters that were working on site, they themselves were coders, and they were advising how they played the role of the coded daughter. So there's those kind of differing elements. Well, they would say it like this, they would actually behave like that. So it was not just me, but there was a team. And another thing, there is so much information that is put into a script, but there is so much that is not. And it becomes up to everybody to translate the script in the best way that they can. And it's lovely to see everybody make the script succeed, add more to it, and including making me look better. So all I can say is that I was happy with that process.
Interesting. Obviously, you're saying it is about the team as well. Obviously, you started with your creative writing and then moving it on to something that you described with Reunion, the team contributing. So that aside, I'm just thinking about with your creative writing, do you continue to be a creative writer, or do you have other plans in the film industry or drama? Do you have any other plans going forward? Anything else?
I am happy with my writing right now. I'm happy with the room that I have to be able to look out the window, waiting for emails and notes. So I'm very happy in my space right now. Looking at the future, I would love to teach others. I mentioned it earlier, teaching how to write scripts, how to tell a story. I don't know if I'm actually a good teacher or not. I don't know if I would have the actual patience. Now, I have two young children, and I think that's more than enough for me, quite possibly. but I am open, and I'm also starting to feel older. I know that I'm not at the end, but looking at what legacy do I want to leave behind? What do I want to share with others? What can I do to make things better for other people? And I think teaching creates more opportunities for others to gain. And the one thing that I have been thinking about a lot is when I was born, there was no deaf drama, there was no deaf TV. It's something that has evolved as I was growing up. And I always thought of, what if I were born now? I would see so many wonderful things. You know, you've got Lumu, BBC, children's TV. There's so much deaf out there, possibly in your, not in your face, but it's there in ways that were not there 25 years ago, 50 years ago. And recognizing that now, and the importance for us to carry on fighting, making stuff, fighting to make sure that we are all included, and fight to make sure that we are represented, that we are seen.
Wow. So you do enjoy your own creative writing. Maybe the word training is wrong. Maybe having a masterclass from William Marger. Maybe that's what you could offer, a masterclass. But I think, sorry, I've interrupted you.
You're building me up too much. Oh my God, masterclass. Oh yeah. Hints and tips is what I would go with.
Well, I think that the word, links well with training, with school and colleges. And also, there's an opportunity to have it as a one-off, but also to repeat itself, what it's like, case studies in film and industry, rather than just a brief. But obviously, whether that would suit your way of working, I don't know. Last question for me, if I may. What would be your sort of guidance for deaf or hearing people, them being, leaders, have inspiration from business or films, or even in their own community? Oh, crumbs, I've asked you.
Okay. The one thing that I have learned about leadership generally, and I have seen a lot of leaders in my time, I've seen good ones and bad ones, and also by how I have been perceived. Now, a good leader does what they want to see. Your work environment to be peaceful. There's pride in that type of leadership. Be the leader that you want others to emulate or be inspired from. It's easy to say it, but to do it. But just to give you an example, our director, Luke, that was on Reunion, he was hearing, and he knew that that people were nervous about their role and directing, and he had to direct so many deaf actors. And he started learning level 1, how to sign, months before filming was due to begin. Arrived in Sheffield, started going to the pub with the deaf actors, practicing how to sign out. He immersed himself into deaf culture, and he tried to be an ally, that's an important word, ally. And I think of Luke being our ally. He also supported BIM, and also was BIM was the shadow director. And the one thing that Luke did that I thought was really, really interesting, when we were filming in studio every day, like we were talking about 12-hour long, hard days. The weather was awful. Like you got all the weathers, the wind, the rain, the sun. I mean, every day the weather is different. And every day there were different challenges. Luke never allowed that to impact us. He was always calm, ready for a challenge, always seemed to have another plan. Maybe he didn't, like maybe internally he was just going wild, but he never showed it. He radiated calm, always radiated confidence. And I thought that was a massive part of helping all of us to get to the very end of a very long shoot. Luke, I think, is an exceptional leader. And, you know, he is a hearing example of a leader. I know it's hearing, but it's also good to have deaf leaders as well. It's those type of people that radiate confidence and calmness in amongst not being loud, but just transmit what they want us to be able to do in their space, which I think is a very important quality. I don't think I ever got there myself. Like I have struggled because I want everybody to be happy. I want to be able to say and do the right thing to make everybody happy. That's always the case because there are times you have to say no. And there were other times when, you know, people couldn't or wouldn't do what I needed them to do. And I never handled that well. There was all that case of anxiety with me and with them. And I look back and I feel bad about those times where I feel like I failed them as well as failing myself. And that is another reason why I'm much happier now managing my own, because I can give out to myself. I can allow myself to go and get myself a cup of coffee. I think managing is difficult because you're dealing with people, and those people have their own set of emotions, their own way of, you know, their own upbringing, their own way of going through life. But how do you influence them to do what needs to be done without controlling them, giving them space and opportunity and autonomy to do what they can do?
Wow. That's very honest of you to share with us participating and watching today. You've already inspired many people. Many people obviously have crossed paths and been inspired by you. And it's like, oh, well, you can, so therefore I can too. There's loads of people out there who've been inspired by yourself. And obviously, you've broken, I want to say not barrier, but it's broken the ceiling of inclusivity through the authentic representation, because you've made sure that everybody's included, whether they're deaf or hearing. Would you agree with that?
Okay, I'm going to put my hand up and saying yes and no. Yes, I agree with making a breakthrough, but one thing that you do have to remember, there's two of us. We're middle white class men. There's a lot of work to be done regarding diversity. We need to bring in other cultures and other communities within our deaf space. We also need more women directors. We need more women. We need Black, Asian, you know, because look at the other minority groupings within the deaf community. Now, yes, representation, but we have to look at the deaf space. We need a lot of work to be done. Now, I am saying that from a position of privilege. Now, when we talk about diversity, and then they're looking at me as being a white man with a beard and glasses, you know, there's less diversity in just the look of me. And you're talking to me about diversity, but it's hard. I'm unsure. Like, we do have to provide training. Now, when we were recruiting for Reunion, the actors that were seen were white, the majority white men. There was an imbalance. You can see the gap there. Those are the kinds of things that we now just need to start looking at. And within the UK, in terms of deaf media, the big question that needs to be answered now is diversity within that space. Because looking around, who are the successes? Who are leading the way up to the top? What are they doing to bring others with them? So if I can show that I'm doing it, others will do it.
That is a perfect point to end. I totally agree with you. I have to say, 20 years ago, diversity was way at the bottom of the list. I think now going forward, we are starting to see diversity growing. Obviously, we need to see far, far more of it. I totally agree. We are in a very privileged position, without doubt. And I think that's why it's greatly important to see deaf leaders out there from diverse backgrounds to be embraced and not only encouraged, but to show that they have a worthwhile place. So I'm so pleased that you've highlighted that. Spot on, a perfect conclusion. Just one last question that somebody's sent in from the audience that participating. The question is, how do you take risks? And what significant risk have you ever taken? That's a question from our audience.
Quitting my job from See Here as the See Here series producer, because I wasn't feeling fulfilled anymore. I felt like, who am I? Am I going to be doing this for the rest of my life? So quitting. But the worst one was the timing. The timing could have been better. I quit it in July 2019, 6 months before COVID. But in a weird way, it possibly was the best time because I had to do something and I had to write. There was no other options. The only thing that I could do was to write. And that was a big risk, to give up a very well-paid job, to go from that to nothing, and to focus on something that I love doing. And it took around about 2 years of writing, and it was writing reunion in this space right now, in this room, in this table, and everything took off from there. That was a risk, but I would not recommend it to others. Try and plan better than I did, because the timing at the time was scary. There was the possibility of losing the house, having to borrow money from the parents, remortgaging the house. My wife and 2 young children, it was terrifying. But I'm really happy I did take the risk, because now it has given me much more creative fulfillment than I had previous to that.
Wonderful. William, it's been a fantastic interview. I could ask you so many more questions, but I really appreciate your great honesty throughout the interview, and I thank you for that. It's been such a great pleasure. Thank you so much, William.
Thank you. An absolute pleasure. Over and out.
Well, William has been given a fantastic opportunity to give us a summary. So that's the finish for these webinars for the UK Deaf Summit Leadership. But the next webinar is going to be next year, and we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you to William, and thank you to all in the audience.
Cheers.